We are live on YouTube. Hello and welcome everyone. As always, we are joined by our director, Eva Hussein, and our guest for this week, Hazara Lianga, the Relationships and Growth Coordinator at Polaron. Hazara is having an in-depth look at how to disseminate information to multicultural communities. If you would like to learn more about communicating with diverse communities, subscribe to our YouTube channel where we upload videos weekly. Over to you, Eva.
Thank you, Stephanie, and good morning to you, Hazara. How are you going today?
Going well. It's a nice morning. The weather's good, so no reason to be upset.
No. Although we can always find a reason. So what are we talking about today?
Today we're talking about information dissemination strategies, which sounds fancier than it actually is. In simple terms, it's just talking about the easiest ways to communicate with multicultural audiences. Yeah.
Okay, and what is it that you can tell us? And usually we get watched by all kinds of organizations who really genuinely want to connect with communities out there, with the message, whatever that means. So a lot of the time we might be working with health services providers or organizations that in their, I guess in the way that they do things, they do need to open up and speak to multicultural communities. What would be some of the things you'd be advising them to do just on a practical level?
I would suggest just reviewing their current strategies is also a really great place to start, because I think we kind of establish strategies along the way and we're so used to doing them that we don't even realize they may not be as effective anymore. So that's definitely my first recommendation. My other recommendation is really just collecting data about your audience, which sounds very technical, but really it's just about getting to know what your target demographics like, what works for them, what doesn't work. And I think once you have some sort of data collection method in place, it makes it easier for whatever campaigns you run subsequently. It's really easy to just gather what sort of information does work and what sort of strategies do work. So yeah, that's my first recommendation, I'd say.
Okay, so but let's imagine, let's put ourselves into the shoes of an organization that has a message, whatever that may. Let's say it's mental health, because I know that you've come to Polaron with that experience. What would be the first step? And as you said, you do need to base it on data or information. And we live in the age of information gathering, but it seems that there's a gap or lack of knowledge of how organizations can get that data. So where would you suggest that they go?
Well, there's a lot of different ways you could do this. There's the literal way in the sense of surveys and focus groups, which of course are time consuming and can be quite difficult to operate. But if you have the capacity to do it, I highly recommend it. But otherwise, there's simple methods, attending community consultations, holding information sessions, just really getting to know what the community likes and what they don't like, just literally through conversation, honestly. I think a lot of community leaders have great insight into this sort of information, and it could be a really easy way just to understand your target demographic without having to really, invest a lot of time into research. Yeah.
Right. So investing, I like the word investment that you use, because it cannot be a situation, I guess, if anybody wants my advice, of where you sit in an office, have a meeting, and you think, okay, well, we have all these multicultural audiences, diverse people, CALT, whatever label you want to put on them, and we've got to reach out to them, and you sort of run out on the street and see, okay, who's there? I want you to have my information. How do you actually develop that over time? Like, what would you suggest is a more respectful way of doing this?
Well, I think it's good to take a practical approach. So if there's this particular type of group that you're trying to reach, think about who they turn to for information. Think about what resources they turn to. There's a lot of local businesses and local media outlets that communities have. So that's a really great place to gather information and sort of understand what these communities enjoy and what kind of information they do respond to.
And that investment that you talk about, it is more about, it's not even about money, right? It's about looking at your communities. Well, first of all, looking at who your organization is, right? And I think in some of the previous sessions, we've talked about cross-sectionality. What does that mean? It means that people aren't one. You can't put them into boxes. You and I are, different. We're different by age, by ethnicity, by place of birth. There's so many things that are different about us, but there are things that are common. We're both women, we're both professionals, whatever, right? But you can't sort of sit there and think, okay, well, this person is of Sri Lankan origins or whatever it may be, or her parents were born in Sri Lanka. Here's a recipe for communication with Hazara. So what would you say would be that respectful conversation, or how would you get it started?
I think it's really about building a relationship. So it's not even going in with the intention of, collecting data, as crude as it sounds, more so just getting to understand the person and understand where they're coming from, what their motivations are, what pains them, what inspires them. And I think that kind of naturally leads to a way to like connect with them, and at the end of the day, that's the goal, right? To connect with audiences and to really improve their lives. So yeah.
Right. It's just that it sounds difficult. So could you give us 3 ideas of how to actually do it? You've mentioned community events that we can't go to right now because there's not much happening face-to-face. What are some of the other strategies that people or organizations could employ?
There's a lot of different ways, I guess. And there's also the concept of thinking about it in terms of what kind of message you want to send. So if you want to be more direct, maybe hosting some sort of information session or some sort of like, I don't know how to describe it, but if you're someone who has something to offer, then you can be like, come and ask, like a Q&A type thing. Because I think it helps, especially with areas that have low literacy and education rates, you're just there in person and have someone to talk to. And I think another way could be through physical collateral information, so like pamphlets and just online information. That's always worked for the most part. And even if you just want something there, that's probably the easiest way to go about it. And of course, social media as well. You can go live on Facebook as we are doing now. And that's just the easiest way to reach people in their homes, really. And it's comfortable, it's easy to use, and it doesn't require too much effort from either end.
Right. And what is the worst thing that organizations can do if they were to, we're just going back to that big meeting that we're just imagining in our heads. What is the absolute worst thing that organizations can do, apart from not translating? Because I think that is actually pretending that this is not an issue is the worst thing you can do. But what are some of the not do's or ideas of that you shouldn't? Yeah, that's the word. Yes.
I would say, first of all, it would be translating and then doing nothing with the information, because as nice as it is that you've translated it, if you are not promoting what you've translated, then what was the point? You spent all this money translating. So really just investing time into actually promoting that you have the resources in the first place without even thinking about, you don't even need to worry about how they're going to access it. Just let them know that you have it. People might come to you and be like, actually, I'm really interested in learning more about this. Do you have any more information on it? You can hand them a pamphlet or a flyer. It's that simple. I think another way is not understanding what the community actually responds to. So if your community doesn't really respond to online presence or doesn't respond to, uploading documents to like websites and stuff, then don't invest as much time and energy into that, because it's not working for you, Spend that time trying to figure out what your community does respond to and then invest in that instead. So,
and of course, in an ideal world, organizations would talk to every Hazara and every Eva and every Peter, but that's just not going to happen. So you do have to make some assumptions. But I think what you said about just thinking of communities as individually as you can. Yeah. So first of all, your message is crafted in a way that represents your organization well, but in a way that's accessible. So, for example, writing things in a language that's more accessible even, and then thinking about, okay, if that goes for translation, what will I do with it? So it's not just about putting it on our website or printing fancy brochures that are gathering dust, but really thinking of, okay, there's a particular community, how do I reach into them with my information in a way that's actually effective, rather than just, going to all this effort, spending all this money and never really getting anywhere. But as I said, it sounds simple, but it's not easy, right?
It's definitely not easy. And I think it's more about being as proactive as you can rather than reactive. It's good to be reactive sometimes, maybe throw out the different types of strategies out there, see what works, see what doesn't, but then really take that information and then be proactive about whatever next campaign you plan or whatever next promotion you plan, health promotion initiative you plan, because that's the easiest way to really hone your skills in that sense and really develop a good relationship with the target community.
And of course, in the real world, what happens at the level of organizations is that translation or communication with multicultural audiences becomes somebody's job portfolio. Often it's not even in their position description. So Sometimes it feels like they drag somebody into that role because nobody else can do it. And a lot of the time, what we do is educate people who most of the time have really good intentions. They really want to reach out to community, do a good job at promoting what the organizations do, but they have very little understanding or even respect for the industry. So the other day we were talking about a client who said, basically they want everything. It's like when you go to McDonald's, you want, what is it? Happy Meal with all the bells and whistles. But they don't really understand that communities aren't sitting there at home waiting to provide feedback, or like, I don't know how else to explain it, but I think the conversation you had with that particular organization is that actually everybody needs to get paid along the way for the work 100%. That we do. So it's not like, yes, we have community leaders, community organizations, and yes, it needs to be a conversation that we have together about how to communicate best. But on the other hand, there's so much money thrown at the language problem or communication problem that just by using it more effectively, maybe that's the way to do it. Yeah. So could you maybe comment on that a little?
Yeah. So honestly, it is quite a big responsibility to have, I think, especially something that's just dumped on your lap in some ways. But I think it's really important to maybe just take the time to really educate yourself on it, because there are a lot of free resources that you can use. And even the internet, LinkedIn, a lot of them have great talks, speakers, webinars on all sorts of information relating to this topic. I think it's still something that's quite like emerging in a way. So people are still trying to wrap their own heads around it. Even people who have the title of diversity manager or consultant, even they're learning every day. I think it's definitely an area where you have to learn new things every day. But in terms of budget, I would say it's also important to have a look at it and just see how you can allocate it in a really useful way. So if you know you have a certain amount of languages that you want to translate, but the budget doesn't quite allow for that, then maybe reevaluate your strategies and figure out which languages are the most useful and which languages will have the biggest reach. And then maybe spend time investing into that and then figuring out a way to really, either widen your budget or figure out new methods of communicating with people. There's always solutions, everything can be done if you're innovative and creative enough. And if you ask the right people, I guess, is what I'm hinting at here.
Right. And you're so right. So only this morning driving to work, I just on the radio, I heard of a research project that's been done, and don't ask me by whom, I can't remember, but they were talking about that in February of this year here in Australia, they surveyed 2,000 people or 2,500 people about diversity and inclusion, which is, expressions that are being thrown around and everyone gets very excited and they have it in their job titles, they have it in their strategic plans, whatever. Nobody actually understands what it means. But what they found through this research was that a lot of organizations are talking about it because they feel like they need to, but people that are diverse and excluded don't feel like they are, right? Because there's just this disconnect between what we think we are doing, as an organization, and what actually happens on the ground. So tell us, Sarah, what would be 3 things that an organization could do to make communities feel more included? And I think you've covered a couple of them, but like if you were to give us 3 top tips of how to go about it.
Yeah, I think the first tip would be just to let them know that you understand and that you do care. Make sure that they know that you're a priority. That they're a priority. I think that's really important. Like, it's important to include strategy and diversity within your plans, but if the community doesn't know about it, then they don't know that you care. So I think that's the first most important thing to do. I think the second one is just really come through with that thought by investing time and energy into developing some sort of relationship with those communities and developing a way to communicate with those communities that's quite effective. And thirdly, I would think investing in people in your own company who are actually committed to delivering that information in a really succinct way. I think there's a lot of people who are passionate about this stuff, but maybe their job titles or maybe their positions don't necessarily allow them, or they think they're not allowed to really expand on that knowledge or like develop it. But I think you should really encourage your own employees to really, even look within themselves. There's a lot of CALD community members out there who are also quite good at information dissemination and all that. So I think if you can find the intersection between those two, you can really find a great way to just simply reach more people with less effort.
Great tips, Sarah. And I think what I find is that the best people to work with, that's a selfish statement, I know that for us, are people that are leaders from within an organization that really and truly care. either because they've had lived experience of some sort, or perhaps their parents or grandparents were in a situation where they were not getting information in the right way. And it's usually driven from within the organization by a person. So we might have, and if they're listening, we might have a Richard or a Virginia or somebody that's really like super passionate, and they take us with them when they, move organizations or whatever, because that synergy between somebody caring and us being able to give them tools to show that they care is what we do well. Yeah. So could you maybe take us through what happens behind the scenes? And it's, Cervantes, the famous Spanish writer, once said that translation is like a tapestry, or the back end of the tapestry. So there's lots of knots, and, there's all kinds of things that we do behind the scenes that people don't see, because all they see is a pretty picture. But take us through those knots and what actually happens. How do we make sure that we provide these people that care with the right tools and the right systems, I guess, to be able to provide that information to communities?
Yeah, well, people come to us asking for translations, and at first they may not even know what languages that they want, and they may not even know what their reach is. So that's where we can help from the very beginning. We can talk to them and can be like, oh, these are the languages that we find might be the most useful for you. I would also recommend doing it this way and that way, because at the end of the day, we've done this so many times that we actually are quite knowledgeable in the sense that we know what information dissemination strategies actually work and what don't. So that's, first of all, right off the bat, that's the most useful thing that we can help with. And secondly, I think it's really great because a lot of people have a lot of energy when it comes to this sort of stuff, but they don't know where to direct it to. So I think with translation, a lot of people assume it's just literally just translating whatever document gets handed to us. But to be honest, we actually review the documents. We have a look at what message you're trying to send, and we have a look at your target audiences as well. And we kind of marry the two so that you can figure out a really, really useful way to connect with your audiences instead of just simply translating. I feel like it's really important to understand that the way that language is presented sort of affects the way that a person connects to the message. And we're really good at understanding that part that is difficult if you don't speak the language. So a lot of our project managers are bilingual. They have really good relationships with translators, so the translators feel comfortable expressing any sort of opinion that they do have about certain resources. And the truth is that we don't have to pass on that information unless it's necessary. So we're doing that vetting process for you as well from our end. And at the end of the day, you end up with a really solid document that actually does what it's supposed to in the best way possible. And that's really our goal at the end of the day.
This is a really great point, Sarah. So I think when people write information in their organization, they not always think of translatability. So in other words, they might have a style guide or a particular language, a particular voice that they use. But what we do with what they write is essentially we look at it and think, okay, is that translatable? Everything's translatable, of course, but how does that actually look in practice? So only yesterday, I looked at one of our clients' documents, and they used the word consumer. The word consumer is used in all kinds of contexts like mental health, NDIS, because it's a word that's empowering in English, right? But in many other languages, it means that somebody consumes something. So if you do a direct translation of that, it's not going to make any sense in a language. So we have to workshop, and you would think it's just one word. I think the translation was like 2,500 words. So, pretty big document. But it's just that one word that we need to hone in on and workshop with our translators about how we're going to translate that. Because the last thing you want is for somebody, I think this was in aged care context, for somebody to receive that information and think that we're going to be talking about eating, which is not what we're going to be doing, right? So we have to find words that are equivalent or provide extra explanations, because the translations that we develop, they need to be fit for purpose. And particularly if literacy or perhaps levels of educations aren't as high as in sort of general population, we need to be even more caring about how those words are crafted in other languages, right?
Yeah, definitely. I think it also goes back to the overall message. We want to ensure that your message gets through, and if it gets lost in translation, then we're not doing our job properly. It's really important for us to be like, okay, this is how the target audience perceives your message at the moment. But if we change it this way, or if we just change 1 or 2 words, your message goes directly to them the way you intended it to. Because at the end of the day, people spend a lot of time coming up with these resources. You know, they're very passionate about it, and it's their organizations, you know, communications and all that. So I think it's really great to just take the time to really evaluate how the message is being presented and how we can help fix that.
Right, and the presentation, well, that's right. And also the content is one thing, but the methods of dissemination, and you've touched on many of them. But one point that I always make, and I'm sure that people are sick and tired of it, is that I, for example, don't consume, speaking of consumers, information in the same way that I did 5 or 10 years ago. So for example, I don't read as much. And most of my acquisition of the knowledge is online actually nowadays. Yeah. So I'm married to my phone and all, all kinds of things like that. And I think a lot of people are, and it's often assumed, they don't speak English or whatever, or they're from a particular community and they're not connected online, but they actually are. And of course, if people don't get the information they're looking for here in Australia in terms of, let's say, health message or health promotion, they will reach for information to wherever they originally come from, for example. Yeah. And that may cause a bit of a clash with the messaging. So one of the examples I often give is, let's say, breast screening. So in some countries that's done once a year, in other countries once every 6 months or whatever it is. In Australia, we have a particular way of doing breast screening, and there are particular very clear messages around that. So if you read stuff from, from other contexts, it'll clash with the health messages that we produce here. Could you think of some other examples of where that might happen?
Yeah, I think outside of health promotion, even just information such as news or just daily events and stuff like that. I know my parents, they still receive their news from outlets coming in from overseas, so Sri Lanka to be specific. And, Channel 7, Channel 9 is right there, but they'll still go on Facebook and they'll still use their outlets that they use back home in their country. And not to say that they aren't accurate, but it gives a very specific worldview, in my opinion. And I think it's important to really expand yourself. And the best way to do that is to make it accessible. If they could understand the news a bit better, or if they could find a resource that they could use instead of what they're used to, then they'd have a bit more of an expanded worldview. So I think it's really about considering intersectionality as well, actually. I think that's a really good point to make as well, just to think about how people, access information and the barriers that limit their access to information. I think once you wrap your head around that, it also makes it a lot easier to, figure out information dissemination strategies that actually work.
And Hazara, you mentioned earlier about the investment, the cost, the conversations that are difficult about, about translation. But what have you ever thought about the cost of not translating? I have.
I know you do.
I think about it all the time because I was once in a position where I didn't speak a word of English. And I think what that does when you don't really understand the system or what's going on around you, it puts you into a spiral and it costs the system more to support me. If that initial investment, so for example, if you are entering an aged care facility, if they get an interpreter for you at the entry level or, at the assessment level, they'll understand your needs better. Yeah. So only yesterday, and was it yesterday? I don't do a lot of interpreting, but yesterday I did because there's a shortage of Polish interpreters, and I went to someone's home. And I think the difference I made, first of all, I love this job. And one day when I quit Poland, which never will happen, I might do interpreting again. But I really loved how it made me feel as an interpreter, because between the Polish speaker and the assessment officer, I created this really clear channel of communication where the assessor was able to very clearly understand what this woman's wishes were. And all she wanted to do is communicate that. So this lady, and we went into her home, which is a pretty sort of sacred space, for a lot of people. And she prepared like a list of things she wanted to discuss. And perhaps she could have managed in English because she's been here for a long time and she does have some English. But to her, what was really important is that somebody comes into her home. That's number one. Because if you remember, they were offering all kinds of phone interpreting and, video, whatever. She wanted to speak to a person. But I walked out of that exchange feeling like we've done such a good job, both the assessor and the client and me, because we really connected and they were talking to each other. I was there just like really a channel.
Yeah.
And I think hopefully, even though, you know, through the pandemic, we're moving into all kinds of communication modes, that face-to-face aspect of doing things with people that are really vulnerable and are, you know, really in need of help, because this lady's managed for as long as she could on her own. Then she reached a conclusion of, look, I need help. Where do I get it? Okay, I go there. I don't speak the language. What do I do? And then when you can very neatly come in and provide that communication channel, that was a really good example of when things worked. And I honestly, I walked out of there thinking, okay, I've done a good job there. Anyway, that wasn't a question. That was just a
No, it's a lovely story. I think it kind of breaks down the essence of what we're trying to do here, which is build a connection. And sometimes it's just about keeping it simple and letting the other person know that we care and that we're just trying to help them and alleviate any sort of issues that they may be having. So,
exactly. Yeah. And I think in this context, it doesn't mean that she's going to get an interpreter every time somebody comes and delivers service, because she's getting a home care package. It just means that she was able to articulate her wishes.
Yeah.
And even if not 100% of her wishes will be able to be fulfilled, because, you know, it's a system, at least she was able to tell the assessor about where she's at, what she wants, and the assessor was able to tell her what's possible and what the plan of action is going to be. Yeah. My rant's over. Stephanie, over to you for questions.
Thank you so much. So I just wanted to ask, why is it so important to engage with multicultural communities through the right channels?
Sarah, over to you.
I think it just simply comes down to making sure that they receive your message. And a lot of the times, multicultural communities are the ones who are in need of very specific resources and very specific information. And that's why certain organizations are there. You know, if you're not reaching your audiences, then what's the point, really? So I think it's really important to just really hone in and figure out what exactly your community needs and what you can do about it.
Cool.
Thank you. Also, what ways can organizations improve how they engage with translation and interpretation services?
I think the easiest way is maybe understanding how translation works. So as Eva was mentioning before, it's not simply just the process of converting the document into a different language. It's about understanding how that message comes across, what each language's, cultural and religious sensitivities are as well, because like she said before, the word consume means something different here and something else in other languages. So I think taking the time to really understand each language and understand the needs of those languages makes it a lot easier to go about this.
Right.
Yeah.
And I would just add there, the first thing I ask anybody that wants to translate anything is, do you really need it translated? Is really translation what you want? Or is it a way to communicate with a particular audience? Because if it is translation, then I'd be worried about you spending a whole heap of money on something that might not work. So I think what we encourage our clients to do is to think of that communication journey for our community. What are they, where are they on that spectrum in terms of receiving information? So, for example, let's say Italian or Greek communities have probably had everything translated that you can think of, but there are smaller emerging communities that don't. So as a service provider, you might want to ask yourself, okay, I've got this message, but yes, I can reach very high numbers, but should I maybe consider smaller communities, ones that don't ever get anything translated? So I think it is the first thing you need to do is have a conversation with a service provider. We'd love for that to be polar on, but hey, it's a big industry. There are lots of providers, some better than others. But that curiosity, be inquisitive, ask questions, but also disagree with what people are telling you. Like, ask where are your translators if you're talking to translation providers. Are they in Australia? Are they native certified? Have they worked on health resources? You can really have a detailed conversation. And yes, it takes more time, but the output is better. Is it not, Hazara?
Yeah, definitely. I encourage people to tap into our knowledge and because at the end of the day, we're kind of experts in this industry. And if you're finding yourself confused about something, the best way to go about it is to ask the person. We're not going to respond negatively to someone questioning our methods because we believe in our methods. So genuinely, like if there's anything that you're unsure about, just ask the next person who you think has the best idea about how to go about it.
Yeah, and sometimes clients challenging us about certain aspects of things make us improve. So for example, at the moment, we're working with someone that's asked us for references, and like they sent us a list of 20 questions, and we're like, okay, no one's ever asked this before, but it's such a good thing that they have. I think it's amazing where we need to sort of look at their question and think, okay, well, they are genuinely interested in the answers, and they want to have a good process behind the scenes so that they can document it and they know who's going to be handling the information. And it's a wonderful initiative, and I think it'll help us improve. So by all means, the more questions you ask, the better. Sarah, over to you, because we are on time, just for a quick summary of what we talked about.
Yeah, it was really great. I always love talking about information dissemination strategies. That's just, I guess, the marketing person in me, hence the technical terms. But yeah, at the end of the day, there's definitely a lot of places where you can gather all sorts of information from. We're definitely a resource that you should be more than happy to tap into. And yeah, I'm always here to help if anyone ever needs anything. So.
Wonderful. Well, thank you for spending your morning with us. We're going to leave everybody to it, but any questions, feel free to reach Sarah or me, although I tend to rant and tell people off for things, so maybe not. But Sarah's your woman. All right.